The following podcast is non-profit and is based on the IGCSE history curriculum. To maintain control over Germany, Hitler used terror through the SS, Gestapo, and law courts. The SS, Schutzstaffel, were created as Hitler's personal bodyguards and consisted of fully German Aryan men. They wore black uniforms and had an elite army unit in World War II that was called the Waffen-SS. They were also in charge of patrolling concentration camps and played a significant part in the Night of the Long Knives, as they assisted in executing SA leaders. The Gestapo was a secret police force controlled by the SS, who had the power to bug phones and intercept mail. They had a network of informers who reported on anti-Nazi activity, which included telling anti-Nazi jokes and refusing to take part in Nazi celebrations. Law courts were controlled by the Nazi Party and only consisted of pro-Nazi judges. This made a fair trial impossible, and many were sentenced to death. Propaganda was a major feature of Nazi Germany, but what made a good piece of Nazi propaganda? Firstly, it had to promote a pure-blooded Aryan German nation consisting of people with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a physically fit appearance. Secondly, it should promote having more children to expand the Aryan population. Thirdly, it should enforce a strong Nazi party that will protect the pure-blooded Germans. And fourthly, it would enforce the idea of Volksgemeinschaft, which means a people's community. Types of propaganda included sports, culture, rallies, radio, and press. The system of propaganda pretty much went like this. There was one major ministry called the Ministry of Propaganda, which was in charge of the Reich Radio Company, the Reich Press Chamber, and Reich Chamber of Culture. The Reich Radio Company controlled all radio stations. They set up public loudspeakers and produced cheap radios to encourage all people to listen to Nazi speeches and propaganda. The Reich Press Chamber controlled all newspapers. They made newspaper editors responsible for news articles and censorship of foreign articles. Finally, the Reich Chamber of Culture controlled all films, plays, books, and arts. All artists, writers, and filmmakers had to be members to make sure they produced Nazi-approved work. These arts often had to conform to traditional morals and values and Nazi ideology. Now I'll be discussing Hitler's control over the churches. Hitler believed that the Catholic Church was a threat to his power because of the following reasons. Firstly, Catholic schools and youth groups were in direct competition with Nazi schools and Hitler Youth as they taught contrasting messages. Secondly, Catholics usually supported the Centre Party and not the Nazis, and the Nazi needed votes. Finally, a Catholic's primary loyalty was to the Pope and not Hitler. Hitler therefore signed a concordat in which he agreed not to interfere with the Church if they stayed out of politics. However, within a few short months, Hitler broke this agreement. The Nazis shut down Catholic monasteries, schools, and organizations, and priests were harassed. Those that criticized the Nazis were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Pope Pius XI was angered by this and made a famous speech called "With Burning Grief," criticizing the Nazis. This resulted in the arrests of 400 Catholic priests who were also sent to concentration camps. There were 28 Protestant churches which were pressured to agree to combine with the National Reich Church, with Ludwig Müller as the Reich Bishop. The Reich Church was a church that had Nazi aspects. For example, the Bible was replaced by Mein Kampf, and crucifixes were replaced by swastikas and swords. The Protestants who disliked the changes to the church created the Confessing Church, which rejected the new Nazi Reich Church views. There was also a pagan-style German faith movement set up by the Nazi Party, which focused on the worship of nature, especially the sun. Fanatical and loyal Nazis were great supporters of this. However, most Germans continued to follow their faiths. Minister of Propaganda, Goebbels, organized festivals consisting of pagan ideas to reinforce Nazi ideas. The Nazis began to increasingly persecute minority groups. They believed that Germany was weak because its Aryan race had been contaminated by mixing with races they believed were inferior. Also, over 1 million of healthy German men had been killed in the First World War. As a result, the government wanted to create a national people's community, or Volksgemeinschaft, made up of physically and mentally healthy, socially useful, pure-blooded Aryans. To enforce this, Germans were taught about racial hygiene, laws were introduced to forbid Germans from having sex with inferior races, and many inferior races and undesirables were killed. As a result of the persecution, there were increased numbers of racially pure Aryans, a national people's community was created, and Germany became a strong nation and leading world power. Why did the Nazis persecute the Jews? Firstly, they believed that the Jews were to blame for the death of Jesus Christ. Secondly, the Nazis believed that they were greedy for money and were to blame for Germany's economic problems. Thirdly, the Nazis believed many of them were communists and were therefore to blame for Germany's defeat in the First World War. Furthermore, the Nazis disliked that many of them had become successful businessmen, bankers, doctors, and lawyers. They believed that they had too much influence on the German economy. Finally, the Nazis believed that they were racially inferior and subhuman, and therefore did not want their genes contaminating and weakening the Aryan race. Why did the Nazis persecute the Slavs? Firstly, Nazis believed their land should be taken from them for Lebensraum for Germans, and that the Slavs should be enslaved for Germans. Again, the Nazis believed that the Slavs were racially inferior, and therefore did not want their genes contaminating and weakening the German race. Why did the Nazis persecute the Roma and Sinti? The Nazis believed they were homeless, work-shy tramps because they were nomadic. Again, the Nazis believed Roma and Sinti were racially inferior and did not want their genes contaminating and weakening the Aryan race. Why did the Nazis persecute the blacks? Firstly, the Nazis disliked the influence that their jazz music had on young people in Germany. They believed that jazz music was morally corrupt. Furthermore, the Nazis believed that they were racially inferior, so they did not want their genes contaminating and weakening the Aryan race. Why did the Nazis persecute the homosexuals? The Nazis believed that they were weak, effeminate, and that their sexual practices were unnatural, as they did not conform to traditional morals and values. Why did the Nazis persecute the disabled? One reason is that they believed the disabled were no use to the economy, as they were unable to work. Therefore, they were a drain on the economy, and the Nazis believed it cost too much to care for them. Furthermore, they hoped that the money could be used to further develop the country and its economy. Why did the Nazis persecute alcoholics and asocials? The Nazis believed that these groups did not contribute to the people's community, because they did not conform to social norms and values. The Nazis used Action T4 to persecute the disabled. In 1933, sterilization commenced and disabled people were no longer allowed to have children. Then, in October 1939, doctors working for the Nazi Party were ordered to carry out euthanasia. Action T4 targeted those with severe disabilities with the aim of cleansing German society. They thought that the disabled were socially useless as they could not work. Therefore, the money spent on helping the disabled could be spent on helping the poor. Around 300,000 disabled people were killed by the Nazis. German children, including babies to teenagers, were given lethal injections and their bodies were burned. One man in charge of the program horrifically joked about their ashes being used as fertilizer. Parents were told that their children had died of natural causes, but many were suspicious as they never got to see their children's bodies. In the 1930s, the Nazis began to take much more action on their anti-Semitic views and began to persecute the Jews much more harshly. In February 1933, the Nazi newspaper Der Stürmer began to increase anti-Jewish propaganda. The motto of the newspaper became, "The Jews are our misfortune." On the 1st of April 1933, the SA carried out an official boycott of Jewish businesses. They drew a Star of David on their windows and stood outside to discourage customers from using or visiting them. On the 7th of April 1933, the Nazis passed a law which banned Jews from certain professions, for example, teachers, lawyers, and civil servants. In May 1935, signposts were placed in German towns that said Jews are not welcome here. In September 1935, the Nuremberg laws banned sexual relations between Germans and Jews and withdrew the citizenships of Jewish people. In April 1938, Jewish property was increasingly confiscated. In October 1938, Jews were now required to have a letter J on their passports and identity papers. From the 9th to the 10th of November, thousands of Jewish properties and synagogues were destroyed during Kristallnacht, also known as the Night of Broken Glass. On the 12th of November 1938, Jews were banned from owning businesses and Jewish children were banned from attending school. This is the end of the podcast. Thank you for listening.